All right. Well, welcome and good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to another rendition of Riders of Washington featuring Brian Morra's second novel in the Able Archers series, The Righteous Arrows. A little note of housekeeping before we get started. Please mute your microphones until the Q&A portion of this event, and I will be monitoring the chat and will try to address any questions you post in the chat in the Q&A portion as well. So let me introduce our featured author for today's Writers of Washington. Brian Morra graduated from William and Mary in 1978 with a bachelor's degree in history. Brian has been highly engaged in the William and Mary community since his graduation. He was a member of and the president of the William and Mary Graduate Studies Advisory Board from 2008 to 2018. He is now a member of the Washington Center Advisory Board and has been since 2022. Brian was an Air Force intelligence officer from 1979 till 1991 and was a Soviet area specialist. He had been an aerospace industry executive for more than 30 years until his retirement at the end of 2016. He has also been a corporate board member and consultant. The Able Archers series is a series of historical spy novels based in the Soviet area. So naturally, we've invited two incredible William and Mary professors to interview him today. Professors Sasha Prokhorov and Elena Prokhorova, who are professors of Russian and film and media studies. Now, Brian, why don't you tell us a bit about your new book, The Righteous Arrows?
Well, Katie, thank you very much, and thank you, Sasha and Elena, for agreeing to do this with me tonight. It's a pleasure to be with you. We did a program a couple of years ago for my first book, The Able Archers, with I think we actually were the very first program for the DC Writers series. The Righteous Arrows, as Katie said, is the sequel to The Able Archers. It's the second book in this series of historical fiction novels. There, as is the case with the first book, there are two main characters who portray the events through the device of first-person narration. And the two main characters are an American intelligence officer who's based more or less on me, and his Soviet counterpart, who is a Soviet military intelligence or GRU officer, who's quite a bit older than the Americans. So there's a difference in where they are in their lives and in their careers and so forth. Um, the first book, The Able Archers, it centers around the 1983 nuclear war crisis that nearly led to a global nuclear war between the Soviet Union and the United States that most people are unaware of. So I wanted, in part, to bring that story to life in a novel to make more people aware of it. The Righteous Arrows, the follow-on book, begins just after The Able Archers ends in early 1984. And at the beginning of The Righteous Arrows, we learned that, hey, that crisis we thought was completely over at the end of 1983 is not quite done. And so the opening action is in Germany, related to that continuing nuclear war confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union. Then The Righteous Arrows switches locations and years to the Afghanistan war, the Soviet war in Afghanistan, specifically in the year 1986, which in many respects was the high watermark of that particular conflict. And I think we're going to talk about some of the themes of the Righteous Arrows, so I won't get into that now, but that's a quick snapshot of where the Righteous Arrows is in the Able Archer series.
Thank you. Again, thank you for your service and for agreeing to talk to us today. And we would like also to congratulate you on the award, Annual National Indie Excellence Award for this novel, Best Military Fiction of the Year award. And could you talk a little bit about your career and how you made a decision to become a writer?
Yes, well, I've always enjoyed writing, and I think the only creative writing or fiction writing I did in my entire life prior to recent years was when I was a student at William and Mary. And I did a couple of creative writing seminars in my junior and senior years at William and Mary. Um, but in my professional life, I've always written a lot, not fiction, obviously, but a lot of reports. And as an intelligence officer, you have to, if you're good anyway, you have to write well. Um, and so I always enjoyed the process of writing. When I retired from my corporate career, I hadn't really considered that writing would be a next thing for me to do. But in 2018, I saw that a number of books were coming out, nonfiction books were being released concerning the Soviet nuclear war crisis of 1983. And that prompted me to think, well, maybe I could write about it, but from the standpoint of a participant in that crisis rather than as an historian. And the books that came out in 2018 were written by journalists and historians. The reason they came out in 2018 is that the United States had just recently begun to declassify material about the 1983 crisis, which enabled people to write about it. Um, and Sasha, I'd been encouraged to write about my experiences over the years, but I never did for two reasons. One is I was too busy. And then secondly, I didn't want to go to jail because much of what I did was highly classified. And so I knew I would need to get permission to write about these things, and which I did do. So um, I've enjoyed the process of writing probably more than I thought I would. And so I'm continuing to write this series, and I have another new book underway that it doesn't have anything to do with the Able Archer series as well. So writing is something that I've really come to really enjoy, and I find very rewarding.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you mentioned that some of the settings of your book are is Berlin, Berlin, right? The divided Berlin, as well as the war in Afghanistan. Now, what are the main themes of this book, and which ones are the most important to you? Because it certainly has a variety of plot lines.
I think The Righteous Arrows, one of the main themes in this book is the law of unintended consequences. And we see that both for the Soviet Union and for the United States, particularly in respect to the war in Afghanistan in the 1980s. And just to put a little color on that, so for the United States, the law of unintended consequences really is around the militarization that we and the Soviets helped to foster amongst Islamic groups in Pakistan and in Afghanistan. And so there's a theme in this book where the main Soviet character, Ivan Levchenko, actually warns the Americans that you're arming these guys to kill us, to kill Soviets, to kill Russians. And I kind of understand that because we're adversaries, but at the same time, you're opening Pandora's box, and you don't know what the unintended consequences will be of this militarization downstream. For the Soviet Union, I think the whole war in Afghanistan, the Soviet war in Afghanistan, was one big unintended consequences sort of event in as much as it I think it did weaken the Soviet Union, both internationally and domestically. And it was one of the contributing factors, I think, in the ultimate fall of the Soviet Union at the end of 1991. So unintended consequences is a big theme of the book.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Um, so one character that intrigued us, especially kind of towards the end of the book, is somebody whose name is Dr. Robert Gillis. So
Yes.
he's strategically positioned at the very end of the novel, and he makes some major decisions. We don't know what they are, but based on Captain Cattani's updates from Pakistan. So is this character based on any real person you knew during your career, maybe?
Yes, the character Robert Gillis is a thinly disguised Robert Gates, who, of course, you all know as Chancellor of William and Mary, former Secretary of Defense and former career CIA officer. And I knew Bob Gates back during my time in the intelligence community and even later. And his character is in this book is the deputy director of Central Intelligence, and which was a role that Bob Gates actually did have. And he he has a what I think at least is a memorable scene with the character Kevin Cattani toward the end of the book, where he's essentially interviewing Cattani in his office at CIA headquarters. As Sasha said, Cattani, that character, has just come back from Pakistan. And Cattani, again, for those of you who haven't read it, Kevin Cattani is the American intelligence officer who's based on me. He's kind of my alter ego. And he comes back from Pakistan and briefs senior people at CIA, including Dr. Robert Gillis, who again is this thinly disguised Bob Gates, and they have a this interview that Gates does or Gillis does in his office with young Cattani, and Gillis discovers that Cattani's a William and Mary graduate and that they have many other things in common. And he says to Cattani toward the end of this interview that, "Wow, you're my doppelganger, and we'd we'd love for you to transfer from the Air Force to CIA and so forth." So he's the whole purpose of this interview essentially is the character Bob Gillis is trying to recruit Kevin Cattani to leave the Air Force and come work at CIA, which is something that actually happened to me. So I was writing from experience in that sequence.
Very cool. Thank you.
Well,
Um, so my question is kind of a longish one, but it's natural for literature scholars that we are in part to wonder about kind of this first person perspective, right? What are the advantages, but also the dangers of choosing a first person narration? And moreover, because you write as first person from both Cattani's point of view and Levchenko's point of view. Now, what is the creative process of writing from the point of view of the opponent, right? And the interesting thing is, frequently, like for example, in spy novels, right? The opponent is, I don't know, it's a caricature, while you are very respectful towards your Soviet opponents. Could you comment on that? Thank you.
I when I first started writing The Able Archers, which is also in first person narration, it's the same method in that book as well. When I first started writing, I started in third person omniscient, and it just didn't have the immediacy for me. I just didn't think it was getting at what I wanted to get at in terms of the soul of the story and the soul of these characters. And I tried first person narration, and I found it very tough. I found it very challenging to to write first person narration. For one thing, it narrows your field of view. Everything has to be through the eyes of one of the two characters. But the more I did it, the more comfortable I became with it, and the more intimate it seemed to me. And it was getting at the real guts of this story and of the characters that I wanted to portray. And an advantage of first person narration is that you're in the room. The reader is right there, or if it's not a room, it's out in a bunker or whatever it might be, whatever the setting is. You are there with that character. You're seeing it through their eyes. And I made the decision early, I guess, in the Able Archers process to have two first person narrators, to have the American narrator and Ivan Levchenko. And in terms of it's kind of it's interesting from a writing process. You're almost living in the skin of each character. And when you transition from one to the other, you have to take off one character's skin and put the other character's skin on. That sounds a little gross, doesn't it? But I hope you understand what I'm trying to get at. And with Levchenko, and when I was at William and Mary, I studied in Leningrad, I studied in St. Petersburg, and I was a history major, but I probably should have been a Russian studies major because most of my work was really in Russian and Russian history and so on. And so and then as an intelligence officer, I was a Soviet area specialist, and I had the opportunity to work closely with Soviet officers. I did in Germany with active Soviet officers, and we would interact with Soviet GRU officers, Soviet military intelligence. But then I also had a job in which I worked with Soviet defectors from both the KGB and the GRU, and from the Soviet Air Force. And I got to know them on an intimate basis, and because we would travel together and spend a lot of time together, and got to know these people quite well. And they are really the basis of my character, Ivan Levchenko. And I wanted Levchenko not to be a caricature. I wanted him not to be a stereotypical villain or anything. I wanted him to be a well-educated, even though he's from humble roots, man, and very worldly and very knowledgeable about his adversary, about the United States and NATO. And I wanted him to be a sympathetic character and human, and for the reader to identify with him. And many readers have told me since the Able Archers came out, which was 2 years ago, that they really like Levchenko. They're not too sure about this Kevin Cattani guy, but they really like Levchenko, which is interesting and gratifying on a certain level. And I really enjoy writing the Levchenko character. He's a lot of fun for me to write.
Very cool.
Thank you. One of the one of the kind of sides of Levchenko's identity is his connection to Ukraine. He was born in Crimea. He grew up, I think, in southern Crimea. He studied, I think, in Sevastopol.
Yes.
So this and in this novel, The Righteous Arrows, there is a lot of Ukrainian characters on both sides. Actually, there
Yes.
is
Mike Hosenko.
Mike Hosenko, who
Oh.
has Ukrainian heritage, one of the officers with whom you work. Uh, So why did you choose to include Ukrainian characters in your novel? What does it do? Is it an homage to the present moment when we see in the news, obviously, because of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, all this news about Ukraine and its struggle for independence?
Yes, well, I wanted to set up this dynamic, this tension within Levchenko's life of him being Russian ethnically and having Russian as his first language, but having these very close ties with Ukraine. He's married to a Ukrainian woman. His in-laws obviously are Ukrainian. Two of his in-laws are Ukrainian nationalists, and he has a real affinity for Ukraine. He loves his wife. He loves Kiev. He went to the Soviet Air Force Academy in Kiev for his college education, which was a real place and a very prestigious school. And that's where he met his wife and so forth. So he has all these ties. And I was writing before the general invasion of Ukraine in 2022. But of course, as we all know, the war has been going on since 2014. So I did have that in the back of my mind that I wanted to bring that kind of Ukrainian dynamic, partly because of what's happening today, into the mix. But I also did it just because I thought it would be interesting from a writing perspective, and it would be a natural source of tension within that family, within the Levchenko, his world, and then on the American side, you mentioned the character Mike Hosenko, and Mike, that character is based on a very, very dear friend of mine who was Ukrainian American, who passed away a number of decades ago now. But we were in Air Force intelligence together. We did many of the things together that are described in The Righteous Arrows. And Mike he was a Ukrainian nationalist, and he was an American citizen, but his parents were from Ukraine, so he was first generation American, and he spoke Ukrainian really as his first language alongside English. Um, and I Mike was one of several Ukrainian American officers that I knew very well and worked with in Air Force intelligence. And they all had this strong sense of Ukrainian identity and nationalistic fervor almost. And so that's why I included the Mike Hosenko character.
Okay,
Cool.
thank you. Uh, we talked a little bit about this before, about literary models that inspire your work, and whether you have read, could you maybe comment whether you have read any Soviet or Russian military or spy novels or memoirs when you worked on the Cattani novels? Was it part of your background research for this novels?
Right. And did I didn't read Soviet era spy novels, not Russian language spy novels anyway. But I did do quite a bit of research in nonfiction sources in from the Soviet days, Russian books, magazines. In the case of the Able Archers, I remember I watched some television interviews, Russian television interviews, and things like that that helped fill in some blanks for me. With the Righteous Arrows, I did a lot of research into nonfiction histories and memoirish accounts of the Soviet war in Afghanistan from the Soviet point of view. I wanted the Soviet experience in Afghanistan in the Righteous Arrows to be as accurate as I could make it, and to be as accurate from a military standpoint as I could make it, as well as the psychological standpoint and the impact the war was having, both at home in the Soviet Union as well as on the troops in Afghanistan. And and I think I managed that fairly well. I did get a response from a reader who was a former, I guess he was a former Soviet officer. He didn't really go too much into his background, but he did say he'd been a Soviet military officer. And he commented on my treatment of the GRU and the special forces, the Spetsnaz operations in the Righteous Arrows as being really accurate. And he said something like, wow, I mean, how did you do this? Because this is the way you depict our operations. That's exactly how we did things in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. So, but that knowledge came from a lot of reading of Soviet material, Soviet era materials, or post-Soviet era histories of Russian histories of the war in Afghanistan.
Okay. Thank you. So, I mean, a lot of the novel goes in a pretty parallel way about, Captain Cattani and Levchenko. But there is a huge discrepancy in their ranks, right, between the two of them. One is a general, the other one is a captain. So it's really fascinating. And so, why did you decide to go this way?
Yeah, and yes, you're right. In the Righteous Arrows, Levchenko is a one-star general now, and he's in charge of all the GRU and Spetsnaz forces in Afghanistan, which was a huge responsibility for him. And it was something it was not like anything he'd ever done before in his career. And he'd never been in a war zone before either. Uh, the discrepancy in rank really begins in The Able Archers, of course, the first book, where Levchenko is a full colonel and Cattani is captain. And um, I I wanted Levchenko to be a real contrast with Cattani in almost every way. And I didn't want them to be peers. That just didn't feel right to me. And I wanted Levchenko to be in a position to almost mentor Cattani, which he does do actually in both books. And I and in order for him to do that, Levchenko would have to have much more senior rank, and I wanted Levchenko also to have sufficient rank that he would be operating at pretty senior levels within the Soviet military and intelligence hierarchy. And that would enable me then to show the reader and provide insight into how the senior Soviet hierarchy operated and how they worked with each other and the like. Cattani also, even though he's junior in rank, has access to some pretty senior people on the American side. Um, but it's different with Levchenko because Levchenko is more of a near peer to those senior people. Um, but yeah, it's another, I guess, source of dynamic tension that I wanted to set up, that they are quite different, almost 20 years apart in age and very different in both rank and in life experience.
Yeah, and this allows you to actually show very different kind of aspects of both, the operation of the military, right, and the intelligence, but also, different paths in life, if you want, right, and
Right.
different circumstances.
Yes. Yeah.
Uh, Well, for those who haven't read the novel, this will be probably revealing something important about the novel, but still, I would like to ask this question because I think this is a very successful, actually, section of a great novel. You have this episode of a very dramatic failed family dinner scene right in the middle of the novel.
Cattani's family, right?
Captain Cattani's family dinner, right? When Captain Cattani introduces his girlfriend to
Sandy.
Sandy to his mother and father. So, could you comment on the role of this particular episode in the overall narrative of the novel? Very dramatic scene.
And fast.
Right, almost a battle of itself next to the battle with Spetsnaz.
Yeah, a different kind of battle, right? Well, I had several objectives, I think, with that scene. One is that I felt it in this book. Well, Sandy Jackson, just to give a little bit of background and context for folks, is Kevin Cattani's girlfriend, and she has been his girlfriend since the Able Archers book. So she's a character in the Able Archers book as well. And she is Cattani is a white American guy. Um, Sandy is American. She's an officer in the U.S. Air Force as well. She's a nurse who is actually in medical school at Georgetown, about to be, studying to become an Air Force doctor. She is half black and half Japanese. And he and Cattani and Sandy met while he was stationed in Japan in the first book. And so there's not racial tension between Cattani and Sandy, but Cattani knew there would be with his family, his own family. And so even though he and Sandy have been together for some time, his family's never met her. And he approached this dinner with great apprehension because he was concerned that this might destroy their relationship. And their relationship was already under stress for other reasons. The main reason was that Sandy was not happy that Kevin Cattani kept volunteering for dangerous missions and was not content to have kind of an office job in Washington even for a few years. And so that was a big point of contention between them. And I felt I needed a scene to bring that tension between them to a head. And this was that scene. I also wanted to give the reader a bit more insight into Cattani's backstory and his family, because there's a thread going through the Able Archers and the Righteous Arrows where Cattani is clearly not close to his family. He doesn't go back and visit them very often, but you don't really know why. It's not really revealed as to what the reason for this is. And I felt that I needed to explain the reason for that to the reader before these books went any further. So I felt that scene dealt with some very painful things for Cattani, but that they needed to come to the surface at one point, and it seemed like this was the time to lance the boil, so to speak.
Well, it's a very successful lancing that you do. So I actually have a follow-up question, and that is that both Cattani and Levchenko spend a lot of time away from their loved ones, their families, and Well, for Cattani, it ends up being, a real breakup, right? And Levchenko, he just misses his wife a lot, and tries to kind of, he has a shrine for her basically wherever he is, which is a good way of describing it. I understand that. So is this one of an important themes, this kind of toll that service can take on your family?
Yes, it is. This is a theme of this book in particular, and I think that that theme is there throughout, and it maybe gets brought up or brought to a climax in a way when Cattani flies home, when he comes back to the United States from his months in Pakistan, and he lands at Andrews Air Force Base, and he has this feeling, and it's Christmas time, it's the holiday season, and he has a feeling of profound alienation
Yeah.
From not only his family, but from the United States and from his fellow citizens. And it's partly because he's not being met by family like other service people are. He's alone. And so it's partly that, but it's also partly that he's been off doing very dangerous work that is secret that he can't really talk about, and that the not just the American public, but even his fellow service members don't know about. And that's further alienating for him, that, we may even wear the same uniform, but you have no idea what I've been through or what I've done, and that kind of thing. And that's a feeling that I certainly had personally. And I know a lot of, especially, intelligence officers and special operations people that go into very hazardous situations. I've commiserated with people over the years that that's an alienation that is commonplace, I think, amongst people that do those things, the dangerous things in dangerous places that have to be kept secret and that are not understood or appreciated by their fellow citizens. So that theme of alienation, I think, is what's maybe brought to a head there at that scene at Andrews Air Force Base.
Yeah, and you have this great psychological detail, because he asks somebody if it's Christmas, and they are really surprised, like shocked. No, it's Christmas Eve, because for him, clearly, he's out of the normal environment for such a long time that really something for people around him, it's just absurd question.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah, this powerful kind of sense of displacement, both in time and in space.
Yeah.
Yeah, very. I don't know. I mean, for an outsider, who didn't have this experience, I think you convey it so well and subtly and in a very kind of profound way. Uh, when I say thank you for your service, that's the moment. I mean, because there is this almost visible kind of labor that people like you have to do. So your generation won the Cold War and won it in the best way possible without the hot war.
Pretty much, not entirely.
But
there was a war,
right. So your novel is published at the historical moment when some commentators now say we're in the second Cold War. Do you agree? And does your book comment on the current state of affairs as well, in addition to being a historical novel?
perhaps as a warning or something like that.
Yes, on the second point, it is, I did intend it as a bit of a warning, and it gets back to what we talked about a little bit earlier, which is this theme of unintended consequences and the disconnect between, and this is part of Cattani's alienation and Levchenko's too, which is the disconnect between what they are seeing and experiencing in the field and what is happening back in Moscow and in Washington, and what policymakers are, the actions that policymakers are taking that really don't comport with what these men are seeing in the field. And it's a very unsettling kind of disconnect that I wanted to convey. And the scene where Cattani, after being at Andrews Air Force Base, and he goes to CIA headquarters and has this meeting with these senior people, and he's telling them, well, this is what I'm seeing. This is what General Levchenko warned me to convey back to you, and so forth. And they are dismissive of his observations and his concerns. In large part, they're dismissive. And so that's kind of a further displacement, for Cattani, that, well, these people won't even listen to me. So in terms of relevance to today, unfortunately, I see similar phenomena today in terms of some of our foreign policy actions. And I definitely see a lack of understanding on the part of many in Washington, many policymakers, vis-a-vis Moscow, vis-a-vis Russia, China, Iran, even North Korea. And that is disturbing to me. And that's what I was trying to kind of promote, in especially in The Righteous Arrows. And with respect to the question about the Cold War, are we in Cold War II? Well, if you take a quick inventory around the world, we're currently engaged in a proxy war with Russia in Ukraine. We're in a proxy war with Iran in Israel. And that war is getting heated up, as we've seen in the last week. We are actively engaged in the war in the Middle East, more so than we are in Ukraine. Ukraine is more a classic proxy war. We are facing during the Cold War, it was more or less a bipolar situation between the Soviet Union and the United States and our allied blocs. Today, the world is, I think, much more chaotic and difficult to comprehend, and maybe more difficult to control, if one can control these things. We're in a multipolar world now, and we're in a multipolar world that has an axis of autocracy that is beginning, and the axis, I would argue, is China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And they are increasingly working more and more together, particularly in the military dimension and economically. So it's different than the Cold War in that respect. And if one just looks at the nuclear dimension, which we don't have time to get into tonight, but I'll just mention that soon, by the year 2030, maybe 2032, we will live in a tripolar world of great nuclear powers, with China joining the United States and Russia as the third great nuclear power. And my physicist friends tell me that in physics there's something called the three-body problem, which is inherently unstable, and many people liken this tripolar nuclear world to a three-body problem. How do you bring stability into this situation? And it's not anything that we've really prepared for in the past in the West. We've have based our nuclear policy on having one big adversary, not on having two. And not only do we now have two big adversaries, or soon will, we have another country that's quite disturbing in its nuclear weapons program, and that's North Korea, which has kind of gone off that it's not in the headlines anymore. But since the talks between Trump and Kim Jong-un broke down, North Korea has been on a nuclear weapons building binge, and it doesn't get reported much. So I think what I worry about with respect to this multipolar world is that it's very unstable and potentially very chaotic, and I'm not sure that we have the tools or even the lexicon in our foreign policy and national security policy circles to deal with this world. And it's not just the United States, it's the West writ large. And so that's how I view things. That's probably a longer answer than you were bargaining for. Sorry about that.
Oh, this is terrific. Thank you. Including, the comments in the chat. Yeah.
Right, and I hope many people will listen to your answer. It's such a great answer. I have a lighter question. There is quite a heavy representation of William and Mary in your novel. Your Captain Cattani is an alum, and Dr. Gillis is an alum of William and Mary as well. Would you like to comment why such a heavy representation of William and Mary alums in your novel?
Well, of course, Cattani is introduced in the Able Archers as a William and Mary alum, so I had to carry that through. And then I had this great character based on Robert Gates that I wanted to bring in, so that was a natural. I think that another factor for me probably was this character, the red-haired major, who we haven't talked about tonight. But the red-haired major is a minor character in the Able Archers, and he's a major character. He's all over this second book, The Righteous Arrows, and he was a boss that I had when I was back in those days, and he's introduced. He is a Harvard graduate, and my red-haired major was a Harvard College graduate and was a history major at Harvard. And he was constantly ribbing me about William and Mary. And so I thought that this was a good way of getting back at him a little bit, in this book. And he talks about Harvard a bit in the book as well. But yeah, and I'm a William and Mary advocate. So the more we can mention William and Mary, as long as it doesn't get out of hand, of course, in the book, I think the better.
So we would like to congratulate you again on the Best Military Fiction of the Year award this year. And I can tell you that I'm including the novel in my syllabus for the spring semester spy fiction course. So thank you for this wonderful book. And do you mind if I ask you, is there any way I can ask you maybe to talk to my students in this course in the spring?
Of course, I'd be delighted to do that, Sasha. Thank you for the invitation. Of course.
Thank you very much.
Right. Because I think the questions have started appearing. So Katie,
yeah, we have a lot of questions.
Take it away.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I have been scanning the chat, and I'm going to start with a question from Guy. We are in Cold War II with proxy wars around the world against the Russian brown bear and the Chinese panda. Who wants to poke the panda? Never mind. That was not, I mean, who does want to poke the panda? So I'll move on to Stacy Carell asked, do you feel like your family learned more about you and your career from reading the books? What do they think of them?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of my motivations in writing The Able Archers, and honestly, I wasn't planning to do a series. I thought The Able Archers would be one and done. But one of my motivations was really to leave something for my kids, and because my kids never knew what I did, and so it was, yes, that was a motivation for me, and a lot of members of my siblings and extended family have read both books, and I think that they do have a better understanding of me as a result of that. Even though Cattani and I are not completely, one for one overlap, there's a lot of me in Cattani.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. That was the only question from the chat. If anybody else has any questions, feel free to raise your hand, and I will choose go in order.
Well, people are thinking, I have a question. Oh, there is the question.
Oh, yes. How do you feel like your history major was able to help in your career?
Well, I think it's been instrumental in throughout my career. I think as a young adult, when I was an intelligence officer, um, it helped me a great deal with certainly with writing, because I could write well. I could write intelligence reports well. I could put briefings together. I could put presentations together. But more than that, because I specialized, again, I probably should have been a Russian studies major, but I specialized in Russian history and East Asian history and modern European history. I really didn't take any American history at William and Mary, which is probably a shame. Um, I was very well versed in geography and in the history of these countries and in the political structures. My first assignment, real assignment after lots of different Air Force and other three-letter agency schools, my first assignment was to Japan. And because I had taken every East Asian history course William and Mary offered, uh, I knew my way around, at least intellectually, around East Asia very well. And I could pronounce, I'd studied some Japanese, so I could speak a little Japanese and I could pronounce it correctly. And I could at least pronounce the Chinese names, the Mandarin names. So I think it helped a great deal from that standpoint in my early part of my career. I think in my corporate career, being a history major, again, helped me from a writing standpoint, helped me in terms of communication. It also, I spent my career in aerospace companies, and I was a bit of an anomaly because I'm not an engineer or a scientist, and none of the degrees I have are technical degrees. But I brought a very different point of view to thinking about the business and thinking about how to do things like invest, and I think that was very valuable, not only for me, but I think it added a lot of value to the companies I was in. So I brought a different way of thinking than they were accustomed to, and they valued that, fortunately. So I think a history background for me was extremely beneficial.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Guy, I see you raised your hand. You can feel free to come off of mute and ask your question.
Sure. Like Brian, I was also a military officer in the 70s and 80s. I was commissioned in 77, so we're close in age. And
Yeah.
I was stationed in Germany during the Cold War and then became a defense contractor. So I have a lot of experience similar to his. And when I meet young people today, I try to explain why that Cold War era is so important to understanding the world we're in now. And they are completely ignorant.
Mm.
So I'm wondering, Brian, how do you condense 45 years of tension and but also resolution that we were able to come up with through some really competent leadership that's lacking today? And I guess that's, yeah, how do you talk to people who have no idea of what we went through in the Cold War and the tensions that existed then?
Well, I've had the opportunity, because of writing these books, to talk to students at a number of different universities, William and Mary among them, of course. Uh, and so I've spoken at places like Georgetown and George Washington and Harvard, and um, I admittedly, the student population that I'm talking to is one that has an intrinsic interest in these things. It's not the general student population that I'm talking to. It's people that would read a book like The Righteous Arrows and want to learn more. Um, but I have found, in talking to those kinds of audiences, that there is a real interest in learning more, and particularly, to your point, how does it connect with today and with the situation that we're confronted with today? So it's a these are small sample sizes because they're not the general student population, but what I found is that there is, among certain student groups, a real interest. Even at the high school level, I've been asked to talk to high school students at all over the country, which has been surprising to me, really surprising to me. Um, and I just want to give kudos to um, Sasha and Elena, because they set up a talk for me last October. It was during homecoming weekend, or right before homecoming weekend, for the Russian studies students, and we had a tremendously positive turnout. And those, to this day, I will talk about that session to people, because some of the questions I got that night were among the very best and most intriguing questions I've gotten from anyone, from any audience. So you're doing something right at William and Mary, and keep it up. But that was that was one experience. But I think, in a general sense, I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you. I think there is a general lack of knowledge, and there's there's not much understanding of how it may relate to today, or why the Ukraine, for example, why is the Ukraine war happening at all? I think it is a challenge.
Hopefully, there's a Netflix series that'll explain everything.
Well, may I follow up? Could you talk about a Netflix series where you appear to get, and I think Robert Gates appears in the same Netflix series. Could you
Yeah.
please talk about this?
Yes. Well, earlier this year, Netflix premiered a series on the Cold War that's called Turning Point, the Bomb and the Cold War. Turning Point, the Bomb and the Cold War, which is 9 episodes, I believe, and it's really comprehensive. It's very well done. The production company that put it together is highly reputable, and I think that's a great resource. They have incredible footage, film footage that they've curated that is just astonishing. Some of the stuff they've gotten that they got from East Germany in particular and from the Soviet Union is amazing. So I would recommend that highly. And Sasha's right. Episode 5 of that series is called War Games, and it's about the 1983 nuclear war crisis. And I'm one of the major talking heads in that, as is Robert Gates. And I think it's mostly he and I in that particular episode. They also filmed me quite extensively for an episode on the Soviet war in Afghanistan, but they didn't use any of that footage. And I was the one disappointment I had about the series is I think they give short shrift to the importance of the Soviet war in Afghanistan in that. But by and large, it's a very fine series, so I would recommend it to everyone.
Yes, I completely agree with the comment which says episode 5 is a must watch. If you don't watch the entire actually amazing series, but episode 5 is a must watch for everyone.
Yeah, and we are still working to try to get a limited television series done of the Able Archers. This book, The Able Archers, the first book, was optioned in Hollywood by Legendary Entertainment, but we've run into some of the obstacles that one runs into in Hollywood and actually getting something made. So we'll see if it happens. But I was asked to write the television treatment for it, and what they asked me to do actually was to bring the first part of the Righteous Arrows into the television treatment for the Able Archers, the non-Afghanistan part of the Righteous Arrows. So if this television series ever gets made, it will probably include that first chunk of the Righteous Arrows.
Actually, it's my personal favorite. I love the whole bunker, episode, and the crossing of the border, and because I mean, I don't know, Berlin, the divided Berlin is something we kind of, live through, and we visit Berlin every chance we get. And actually, I do have a question about this. So Americans and Soviets had this mutual agreement which allowed them to pass through the border, right? The intelligence.
Yes, on the Glenica Bridge.
On the Glenica Bridge, did
Mhm.
others, I don't know, like if you have a British officer with you or West Germans, could they go through that border? Or it's just this, the two sides only?
It was the Glenica Bridge crossing was the official diplomatic crossing for the 4 allied powers. So for the Soviets, the British, the French, and the US. And it was used by diplomats, foreign ministry, State Department type diplomats, as well as the military liaison missions. And each of the 4 powers had a military liaison mission. The US had one, the Soviets, the French, the British. And so the French and the British MLM would use the Glenica Bridge all the time. I mean, like we did, like the US did. We did not do, if they happened, they were extremely rare. What I mean is there weren't joint missions between the US and the British MLM or with the French. We didn't do joint we all had our own thing. We all did our own thing. And I was never in the MLM per se, but I supported the MLM. And yeah, so the Glencoe Bridge was the conduit for that. And it was the members of the MLM had a diplomatic passport paperwork. And if you were augmenting them, as I did, you had to get one of those passports as well. You could not get through the Glencoe Bridge crossing without it. And the Soviets, another little kind of Berlin Cold War fun fact is that the Glencoe Bridge was the only crossing that the Soviets controlled. And the other crossings like Checkpoint Charlie and Checkpoint Bravo and so forth, they were controlled by the East Germans. And so the Glencoe Bridge again was that was the diplomatic. And if you've seen them, if folks have seen the movie The Bridge of Spies that stars Tom Hanks, the Glencoe Bridge crossing figures dramatically in that, because that is the Glencoe Bridge was the Bridge of Spies. It was the bridge that exchanges of agents and spies would take place on. And that's where Francis Gary Powers was exchanged for Abel famously as depicted in that movie. Yeah.
Thank you.
It was an exciting place to be back in those days. Berlin was, it's still an exciting place to go, but it was, Berlin was, in West Berlin, I remember the feeling I had being there, especially if we went into the east over the bridge. It was like we're at the edge of the universe. It was a strange sensation of being really in a precarious place, because you were surrounded by enemy territory in West Germany, in West Berlin rather, in effect.
Since we're on this topic, and we kind of allocated right now in our conversation on the Glencoe Bridge, could you comment? We have this return of the genre of kind of swap of kind of a spy swap. We just observed one at the beginning of August recently. And hostage diplomacy is another kind of genre from the Cold War. Could you comment on how do you see, is there any difference between how it's happening now and how it was happening kind of during the classical Cold War period?
Well, I think with respect to the dynamic between Russia and the United States, or Russia and the West, as compared with the Soviet Union in the West, and others on the call may have a different point of view, but my recollection is that during the Cold War, hostage taking was of people that were really not in the game was rare. I mean, if you took someone, it was because they were operating as an enemy agent. And now we have people like, WNBA basketball players being taken as hostages, really as chits for future hostage diplomacy, as you said, Sasha. So to my way of thinking, I think it is a bit different. I mean, I think at least between Russia and the West, as compared to the Soviet Union and the West, in other parts of the world, this hostage diplomacy has been going on for forever. I think you can read in the Iliad and the Odyssey, you can read about it. So
good example.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you all so much. If there are no remaining questions, I would like to thank everybody for attending, and thank you so much, Brian and Sasha and Elena, for taking the time tonight to go over Brian's new book, The Righteous Arrows. And I appreciate you all for your time.
Katie, could I have one just footnote, which is I want to thank everyone too, and I really appreciate it, Sasha and Elena and Katie. Thank you so much for the invitation and for what you've done tonight. And I did, for those folks that might be interested in learning more about my writing and about the books, I do have a website, and it's just brianjmorra.com. It's easy to get to, and these books are available from Amazon and all the major booksellers online. So um, again, thank you all very much. Thanks to the DC Center for setting this up. Appreciate it greatly.
Thank you for a great reading. Yeah, it's great novel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and look forward to talking to your students.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone has a wonderful night. Take care.
Thanks, Katie.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.